The Half-Life franchise is one of the most influential franchises in gaming to date, and has sparked so much inspiration in other games that we know and love. In 2004, Half-Life 2 was released, and it was astonishing to say the least. But in today's video, I'm gonna find out, and you are as well, why Half-Life 2 was so influential. And before I get into that, I'd just like to say that I've noticed that 99.2% of my viewer base are not subscribed, so if you do enjoy this video and you'd like to see more content like this, then please consider subscribing. But with that out of the way, let's continue onto why Half-Life 2 was so influential. When people usually think of PC gaming, they usually think of franchises like Half-Life. Franchises that bring people to the PC market. Half-Life 2 was such a revolutionary title, especially on a technological standpoint. There was a running test in 2003 that showed the difference between Half-Life 1's G-Man and Half-Life 2's G-Man, and the reception was absolutely astonishing. It was literally like going from black and white to colour. The facial animation was so smooth and so elegant, I'd say, that so many people were astonished at the graphical power of Half-Life 2's engine, and Half-Life 2 came out in 2004. Half-Life 2, even in 2003 with the G-Man test, was suiting up to be a very exciting game. Now, the physics in Half-Life 2 were extraordinary, and by today's standards, they seem quite simplistic. Being able to pick up a can off the floor, or a watermelon, anything like that, being able to move barrels, it was truly revolutionary for the time. These physics mechanics aren't just used for traversal or getting up higher places, they can also be used in combat scenarios if you're creative enough. You can use barrels and throw them at enemies. You can pick up razor blades and just chuck them at head crabs. You can also pick up radiators to block enemy bullets. The way that you use the physics engine really determines how you play the game, whether you want to play it smart or just be running and gunning. The main bit of iconography in Half-Life 2, and I'd say the one thing that people think about when they think about Half-Life 2, is the use of the gravity gun. And the gravity gun, I'd say, is one of the most fun weapons to use in any video game ever. You can use it in any capacity that you want. Initially, you can use it to pick up barrels and chuck them at enemies, but later on down the line, when you get the upgraded gravity gun, you can use it to pick up enemies and sling them at each other like you're playing a game of bowling. The gravity gun gives you power like none other. You feel like an omnipotent being when you wield this weapon, like nothing can stand in your way. The use of other weapons may be fun, but you can run out of ammo fairly quickly. But with the gravity gun, you don't run out of ammo. You can just have fun for the entire time that you play Half-Life. Picking up enemies, throwing them across the map, picking up barrels and exploding them. The gravity gun really is like nothing we have ever seen or will see again. The Half-Life franchise is usually praised for having this overarching story which is so brilliant and amazing and in your face. But realistically, the story is told through world building, and it does that more than direct storytelling. You'll hear characters talking but never directly to you. And I love this as a way to portray the story, as the world doesn't just revolve around you. There are other people. As you walk past, people will talk about having their house broken into and how the government can't do that, but then the other says that they will find a way to do so.
This is how it always starts. First the building, then the whole block. They have no reason to come to our place. Don't worry, they'll find one.
I just love this way of storytelling as it really makes the world feel more alive than it already does, and that's amazing. World building isn't just brought up by characters talking to you though. There is a moment very early on in the game where a guard really shows his authoritarianism in the government that you are currently residing in. He stands right next to a door and kicks a can on the floor and tells you to pick it up.
Let me read a letter I recently received. Dear Dr. Green, why have...
After the events of the first game leading to the alien invasion, which then leads to the second game, you can really see how the little man isn't cared for in this world. The world building in Half-Life 2 is the one thing that keeps everyone playing, alongside the gameplay of course. But there's one character that I really can't get enough of, and that's the G-Man.
Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until... well, let's just say your hour has come again.
Although the G-Man was present in Half-Life 1, I feel like he really makes an impact and a statement in Half-Life 2. Straight off the bat, you have an interesting and engaging speech from the G-Man himself, and it is chilling and disturbing, and that's the reason I love this character. He seems so distanced from the actual story, and yet seems to be a witness to any and every decision you make in Half-Life 2, and that's why he's definitely a character that I will never forget. Now, the G-Man isn't the only good character in Half-Life 2. Characters like Alex and Dr. Eli were absolutely fantastic, and their dynamic was great. My favourite character apart from the G-Man though was Wallace. The voice actor did a tremendous job portraying a greedy, power-hungry character, and I really love Wallace as a character, so yeah, G-Man isn't the only one who gets all the credit around here.
Life so he can continue his research.
Thanks to you, we have everything we need in that regard. You're more than qualified to finish his research yourself.
The enemies in Half-Life 2 are characters in and of themselves. The Combine are creepy and scary, alongside the Vortigaunt, as well as the Headcrabs, which are technically the staple of the Half-Life series, and I feel like that's the enemy type that everyone goes to when they think of Half-Life as a franchise. But then there's also the Barnacles. They are very annoying to get rid of, but then you just end up throwing a barrel towards them and shooting the barrel till it explodes, leaving all the barnacles to explode and clear the path for you. And then you have your main enemy type for the game, which is the Overwatch soldiers, which are just like your generic soldiers, but they do have some good voice lines, so I do like them for that. The use of body horror in Half-Life 2 is truly amazing. Having the Headcrabs control a random citizen and then deform their hands to create evil claws is just absolutely astonishing, and I feel like that's one of the elements that really sets the tone for Half-Life 2, is these body horror elements that try and put a more realistic twist into the enemy types for the setting of having an alien invasion. The enemies and the antagonists and the protagonist's companions aren't just the only characters in Half-Life 2. That also comes down to the actual environment that you're playing in, which is City 17. City 17's Eastern European styled city is dying, it is rotting, it is decrepit, it is horrid. The streets are full of litter, the walls are covered in dirt. The only real signs of life you see are the soldiers and the civilians that are too scared to go outside. You can tell a lot by how a game portrays its semi-open world environments, whether that be barren without any character at all, or if they fill it with subtle details and ways to enhance the player's perception of the world that they are playing in. And Half-Life 2 does this to a dramatic scale, having characters that are too scared to leave their own homes as you walk past, having enemies break in and beat up civilians in their own household really sets the overall tone for the entire game. This isn't just a squeaky clean environment with a few enemy soldiers on the side. No, this is an authoritarian nightmare. My favourite chapters, and therefore locations, for Half-Life 2 would be Highway 17, specifically on the bridge. You really get a perspective on how small you are, and yet how much of a big impact you as a character make on the world. And also I love We Don't Go to Ravenholm, because it's such a creepy and eerie environment filled with headcrabs patrolling the city, and it's just really fun to pick up a massive razor blade and chop their heads off. But those are just my favourite locations. You guys might completely disagree. Environmental storytelling is such a big factor in Half-Life 2, and I'd say is almost as big of a factor as world building. For example, you can see a group of enemies in a construction site. You can either choose to shoot them, throw a grenade, or just leave them alone. But if you play it smart, if you shoot a rope in the corner of the hallway that they are in, you can make a massive metal pole swing and knock them all out. It's moments like this that really make the game feel more grounded in reality, rather than just being able to use your guns and the standard mechanics that are present and were present in shooters at the time, as nothing like this was ever really seen in 2004. Valve used a certain system to create Half-Life 2, that being the Cabal system. The Cabal system allowed for a more effective way to create environments, music, set pieces, everything involved in making Half-Life 2. This system made smaller divisions of each system. I know that sounds complicated, but to make it a bit more simple, imagine having a team like the art team and then making that art team be divided into multiple different art teams. Those separate art teams would work with other teams that had used the Cabal system. By doing this, it allowed for levels to feel more free-flowing and had a lot more passion into level design. This is because people weren't just stuck working one level at a time. Instead, they were put on one level and had to combine them together to make one amazing masterpiece. I feel like working on a game like this will be so much more enjoyable, as you have your one own little passion project, which is a level or a concept art design, and you get to put as much effort into it as you can and then present it to the rest of the team. And if Valve didn't like a certain team's art design or level design, then they could go away and work on it and then bring it back to the team. Half-Life 2 is truly a masterpiece in many gamers' eyes. Half-Life 2 is, I'd say, the staple game for PC gaming in general. I don't think there has ever been a higher demand for a sequel than with Half-Life 2 asking for Half-Life 3, and although the community did eventually get a third Half-Life game, it wasn't a continuation of Half-Life 2's story. For multiple years, I've seen YouTubers demanding or wanting to see a Half-Life 3, and we're never going to get an official Half-Life 3, and we just have to accept that. But that just shows the impact that Half-Life 2 has on gamers in general, and I'm a console player, and even I know so much about Half-Life as a franchise, and that's saying something if it's on a platform that I don't necessarily play very often. Half-Life 2 is a success story like none other, and I hope that I have portrayed it in such a way to make you believe so. But that is the story of Half-Life 2 and how it became such a success. And how Half-Life 2 has become a household name. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy, then subscribe and turn on that notification button so you don't miss another upload from me. So thank you and goodbye.